Hey folks, Alan Mandic, the HotRodHippie here. In this video, we're going to set up a benchtop bandsaw configuration that I think is excellent for smaller workshops and garages, or even professionals who might want to have a backup saw or another configuration. We'll talk about it as we go through here. Let's check it out. Now, I've actually shown a saw configuration like this on this channel, in fact, exactly like this, some time ago in a Tooltip Tuesday video, but judging by the fact that it only has 881 views, you probably haven't seen it. So don't worry about that. I'm going to be showing you unboxing the parts we're going to be using, putting it all together, and it in operation. And very soon, I'm going to be building a full custom exhaust on the 65C10 that saw is going to be invaluable for. So get subscribed to keep up to date with that and see how I do it. First and foremost, let's take a look at what we're actually putting together. We're going to be using a swagoffroad kit, which is a table configuration that goes onto a portable bandsaw. swagoffroad is a company that produces DIY tools, things for folks who want to fabricate in their home garage, or even professionals who don't want to spend the money on the big expensive stuff for something they're not going to use every single day. That said, I've got an old press brake setup from them. It's a DIY kit you put together yourself, and it works pretty darn well for what it is. It's allowed me to produce brackets like this mount for this airlift valve assembly that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to produce in a home garage in nearly as clean of a fashion. Now, this isn't at all sponsored by swagoffroad. I have used a couple of their products in the past, but I purchased them all. Let's start with the heart of the entire saw assembly, the saw we're actually going to be using. We're going to be using a Bauer saw from the folks at Harbor Freight for this configuration. I previously have owned a Bauer Portaband Saw, and that was absolutely hands down a superior product to this. But was it twice the saw that the Bauer one is? At the $129 price retail of it, the Bauer saw goes for, which by the way, I bought two of these now, and neither time did I pay the full $129 for it. This saw is hard to beat for that price. It comes in this big, ridiculous blow molded storage case, which I have found useful in a way, but it takes up a lot of room. So honestly, most people are probably just gonna chuck that or use it for something else down the road. The saw features a 10-amp motor. It has a capacity of 5 inches depth and 5 inches tall cutting capacity, and uses a 44 7/8 inch blade, which is a standard blade size available from most retailers. It has variable speed control, and overall, the build quality is superior to what I would expect from Harbor Freight. The worst thing that I can say for this saw is changing the blades is not as easy as it should be. I don't know, something about the angle that they put the blade at through the rollers of this thing. I found my Milwaukee saw was easier to change blades on than this one is. I can't put my finger on why that is. There's just something off about it. It works just fine, and I haven't had any trouble with it, other than it's slightly more difficult to change blades on than my Milwaukee was. The other key components of what we're setting up is the swagoffroad bandsaw table assembly. Popping up in the box, what we get in here is a handful of plasma cut and press brake bent components that will compile together to form a table for the portable bandsaw. I ordered the non-finished version, just the rough cut, so I can paint them myself or just not worry about it. I didn't feel like spending the extra money, and I was worried there might be a lead time on painted parts. I don't know if that's true or not. I wasn't too worried about it. I needed it as quickly as I could get it. I have kind of noted that I previously had one of these setups on my Milwaukee saw, but it used an older, different design. This new configuration actually has a removable center plate that allows for easier changing of the blades without having to fully disassemble. The old one, I used to have to fully remove the tabletop off of it to change the blade out, and that was really frustrating, and actually one of the problems that I had with it, because the threads started to strip out of my saw eventually, meaning it was not really as stable a configuration as it was supposed to be anymore. The kit comes with a single page of instructions, which is all you really should need for this configuration, honestly. Really, the most important thing is it has bolt patterns in the top plate for various saws. So whether you're talking about this Bauer saw I'm using, a Milwaukee, DeWalt, various saws you could use with this thing, all the bolt patterns are there. You just need to identify which ones are going to work for you. And that's really all there is to the swagoffroad kit. It's pretty straightforward, and it makes more sense once we put it together, so let's do that. Our first step is to assemble the legs to the actual tabletop so we can just support that whole setup. This is pretty straightforward. You got 2 legs, 1 tabletop, and 4 bolts. As simple as just an Allen key, a ratchet, and tighten it all together. And with that, flip it over and you've got the tabletop, obviously with a missing section, because that is where the new bolt-in section goes for the actual saw. Our next step is to remove the original shoe guide off of the saw, because we're no longer going to need that. That is where the new plate bolts onto. Then just take your old screws, match them up to the new hardware provided, as it uses countersunk hardware for this tabletop to be smooth and flat, and then we go ahead and bolt it together. I was really happy to see from my configuration with the Bauer saw, it came with hex screws, because all the other screws in the kit that would have been for some other saw configurations had Phillips screws, which I don't really care for in this application. I would prefer to be able to tighten this up with hex keys, not with a Phillips screwdriver. Once that new plate is installed on the saw itself, we can go ahead and install the blade into it, and then we can assemble this entire configuration. Assembling the entire thing is very straightforward. You basically just set the saw into place on that tabletop section. It's got a recess where the new plate sits down into, and there's only one screw that holds it in place. It comes with this knob thumb screw setup that you go ahead and thread in from the bottom. I assembled it first without the washer that's supposed to go on it, which meant that it protruded from the table and would have been in the way of things sliding on it. I quickly realized that's not the way it should be, found the washer, and assembled it with the washer. The final step for assembly is it comes with this Velcro strap, which is meant to hold down the trigger on the saw itself. That way you can get the saw running and have your hands free to hold whatever workpiece you're working with and feeding through. Now obviously with the trigger locked on all the time, anytime you plug this thing in, it's gonna run. So what are we gonna do about that? Simple, a foot switch. I picked up a super basic foot switch off of Amazon, and all it does is it interrupts the signal of 110 volts to the whatever thing you have plugged into it. You can use this for powering up any power tool or electronic device that runs on 110 volts, plugs into a standard 3-pin outlet, and control it with a foot switch. This means you have hands free, just step on the switch and you can operate the saw without having to worry about it. And if you get in trouble, you nick your finger or something, just step off of the switch and the saw will stop. Now honestly, I used to have another foot switch for my previous saw setup, but I liked better than this one. I'm gonna link to both of them in the description down below because this one was like $10 cheaper than the one I like, so you'll find that in the description down below. Now it's time to move the saw to the workbench and start showing you this in operation. But this brings up one thing I don't love about this entire setup. That is that hand thumb screw that I showed you. That's all that attaches the saw and its guide plate to the tabletop. Well, that and the gravity of the thing sitting in its little recessed area. And that works. It does work. But I would really love to see like at least a second clamp or something holding it all together. Like my first instinct when I go to pick the saw up is to grab it by the carry handle of the saw at the top of the thing and carry the whole assembly. But I don't want to do that here because the only thing attaching the tabletop to the guide plate to the saw is that one screw. Now this is easily remedied by just picking it up underneath the legs of the saw, but it's just something that jumped out at me I didn't love about this configuration. I use this setup for cutting angle iron, plate metal, round tube, square tube. This setup just works a treat. Now you are limited on everything you can do with it as it only has a maximum of a 5-inch depth on the throat, but you can kind of get creative with that and design your parts so that they angle away from the motor of the thing and actually cut much deeper and larger components. Or rip down pieces if you're just trying to remove a sliver off of something. You can do a lot if you get a little bit creative with this. But honestly, this is my absolute favorite way to do exhaust, and that's why I set this up. I'm gonna be doing the exhaust on the 65C10, and I do not know why, but this saw configuration for cutting exhaust tubing, I just find it to be superior to even the big expensive setups. That's where I said, like professionals, myself as a professional, I would use this setup in a shop that had a good dual saw. I would still use this when it came to random parts and pieces. It's hard to explain, but I just find this to be a really versatile and useful setup. And if you're in a limited space shop, like my dad has a pretty sizable garage, but if he stuck an industrial bandsaw in the corner of it, it would take up a lot of space for the infrequent use that it would get. You could probably luck out at an auction and buy an industrial bandsaw cheaper than you could put this configuration together. The saw retails for $129. The kit from swagoffroad is $139, and that foot pedal is $20 bucks. So like you could probably beat that somewhere, but not new and not with a warranty. Basically every bracket on the 65C10 that was not part of a kit, something I made, was made with a saw configuration just like this. You can do complex fabrication work with a saw setup like this if you get creative about your designs. And honestly, I highly recommend having one of these, even if you have an industrial saw at your disposal. One more annoyance about the swagoffroad setup that I can say is the adapter plate, the plate that actually bolts the saw to the main body of the table. I understand entirely why it has all the bolt patterns on it. It's so that you can use this setup with various saws. I get that, but it's actually kind of annoying. You see, I cut a lot of corners off of pieces. Not cutting corners, I'm actually rounding off corners. Check out my fabrication tips video to learn why I do that. But when I'm doing that, I end up with a bunch of little triangles cut off the corners of pieces all the time. And they get stuck in those little countersunk holes for the different saw configurations all the time. So I'll randomly go feed a piece through there to cut it, and it'll hit one of those and it'll stop. And then I have to stop, pull those out, move them out of my way. It's a minor annoyance, but it's an annoyance all the same. And that's really it for this saw setup. I just wanted to show you putting this thing together, it in operation, and talk about it a little bit. Maybe give you a mini review here about the setup. There'll be links in the description down below to everything that I've been talking about here. Some of them are affiliate links, some of them aren't. If you use the affiliate links, I do get a little cut of that, but it doesn't cost you anything more. It just helps me in production of these videos, so please consider using them. Now, as I said, I'm working on the 65C10 exhaust actually right now. I took a break to film this video, so I'm gonna get back to working on that. I'm gonna be using the saw configuration on it. Look out for a video on this real soon, so get subscribed. All right, that's gonna wrap it up for this one, folks. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, go ahead and drop it a like. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of the saw configuration? Is this something you could use in your workshop? Let me know what you're thinking in the comments down below. Get subscribed to keep up to date with all the HotRodHippie content. Thanks for coming around, folks.